This is a world overrun by zombies. The virus spread so quickly that humanity's survival hangs by a thread. The military is attempting to evacuate the remaining survivors to a safe zone. But an unexpected event occurs along the way. The bus ahead suddenly stops moving, and when soldiers use the radio to call out, there's no response. An atmosphere of terror quickly engulfs the entire bus. To reassure the frightened passengers, one soldier insists that everything is fine and tells them to stay quiet. He then exits the bus to check the situation. Predictably, he doesn't come back. Panic sets in among the passengers. Another soldier, ignoring their protests, decides to investigate. As he turns to tell the driver to close the door, a zombie suddenly attacks him. In the struggle, the soldier is bitten and accidentally shoots the driver. The bus descends into chaos. With the zombie now inside the bus, everyone is paralyzed with fear. Only Patrick steps up to confront it. He musters all his strength to push the zombie out and manages to close the door. The zombie tries to get back in but soon disappears from sight. Clearly, the bus ahead has already fallen to the zombies. Patrick knew that staying put wasn't an option. They needed to get the gun from the dead soldier to defend themselves. He called on his buddy, Jack, to stand guard while he boldly opened the door and stepped out. As he reached for the gun, the bitten soldier suddenly turned into a zombie. In a moment of crisis, Patrick grabbed the zombie soldier's handgun and fired several shots to take it down. However, the gunfire attracted the zombies from the bus ahead. As Patrick tried to get back on the bus, a zombie tackled him to the ground. He managed to shoot the zombie and quickly hid under the bus. Meanwhile, the survivors inside the bus were not so lucky. Zombies broke through the windows, and the cramped bus turned into a scene of carnage. Those bitten transformed into zombies within seconds. Some managed to escape the bus, only to find the outside world even more perilous. Amidst the chaos, Patrick found Jack but couldn't locate his wife and child. Unbeknownst to him, his wife was currently being attacked by zombies. Patrick arrived just in time to save his wife and daughter, but his wife had already been bitten. In a desperate attempt to stop the virus from spreading, they amputated her arm. The group managed to survive the ordeal and found a safe place to hide. However, the following days were far from easy. Patrick, having narrowly escaped death, failed to appreciate the people around him. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, leading his wife to become increasingly frustrated with his irresponsibility. Gradually, she began an affair with Jack. When Patrick eventually noticed, it led to a heated argument during one of their supply runs, and they parted ways angrily. Tragically, on her way back, Patrick's wife was attacked by zombies and died. Jack blamed Patrick entirely for her death, accusing him of being an unfit husband and father. Enraged and grief-stricken, Jack took Patrick's child and moved to the neighboring shelter. Consumed with guilt over his wife's death, Patrick didn't resist or try to stop them. 9 years passed, and the world had entered an ice age due to the global temperature drop. The zombies, unable to adapt to the extreme cold, were nearly extinct. The once little girl had grown up, and although Patrick, Jack, and the girl remained neighbors, they hadn't interacted in all those years. The girl, unaware of the truth, believed Jack was her biological father, as he never told her otherwise. Patrick, consumed by guilt, couldn't face his daughter. He spent his days hunting and his nights hosting a radio broadcast, hoping to find other survivors, but the radio remained silent. His only companion was a loyal dog. Despite living so close, the two households had vastly different lifestyles. Patrick lived in a messy but comfortable manner, enjoying hearty meals daily. In contrast, Jack tried to maintain a pre-apocalypse lifestyle, focusing on the girls' education, but their food was meager. They mainly ate rice mixed with canned beans or tomatoes, and the portions were always insufficient. The girl often envied Patrick's bountiful returns from hunting, but Jack forbade any interaction between them. She could only play with Patrick's dog in secret, and Patrick noticed all this. Although Patrick couldn't bring himself to face his daughter, he cared for her deeply. Each year on her birthday, he would broadcast a birthday song and secretly prepare a cake, celebrating from a distance. But this life didn't last long. One night, the girl was awakened by a strange noise. Looking through her window, she saw a humanoid creature. Terrified, she couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, Jack found her hiding under the bed. She told Jack about the creature, but he dismissed it as a nightmare, believing the zombies had long been wiped out by the cold and couldn't return. Coincidentally, that day, Patrick went to the mall to scavenge for supplies as usual and saw a creature feasting on an animal carcass. Alarmed, he quickly grabbed his dog and made a run for it. The creature noticed them and pursued. Patrick managed to shut an iron door just in time. but it didn't seem strong enough to hold the creature back. He and his dog took off on a snowmobile. During the escape, Patrick kept looking back, fearing the creature was following them. Distracted, he hit an obstacle and flipped over. When he regained consciousness, the creature had caught up but didn't immediately attack. Instead, it pounced on the snowmobile when it made a noise. Patrick realized the creature was attracted to sound. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, drawing the creature's attention away. This confirmed Patrick's suspicion. The extreme cold hadn't wiped out all the zombies. The surviving ones had evolved into new creatures. While they had lost their sight, their hearing had become extraordinarily acute. The recent gunshot was from Jack teaching the girl how to shoot. Unbeknownst to them, the sound had attracted something terrifying. A frantic Patrick fired his gun in the air to warn them and shouted for them to get back inside. Jack quickly became alert, but Patrick was already tackled by a zombie. The runaway sled nearly collided with the two. As Jack stood up, he aimed his gun to save Patrick but hesitated, watching in horror as Patrick was bitten. At the critical moment, the dog leaped and attacked the zombie, saving Patrick but getting fatally bitten in the process. Patrick seized the opportunity to grab his gun and drive the zombie away. Looking at his fallen dog, Patrick was overwhelmed with grief. After burying his loyal companion, he returned to his cabin and stared at the bite wound on his neck, contemplating ending his own life. However, he ultimately lacked the courage to follow through. Surprisingly, as night fell, Patrick did not turn into a zombie. It seemed that the evolved zombies no longer spread the virus through their bites. The next morning, Jack and the girl were shocked to find that Patrick had not transformed. However, the girl's disappointment in Jack for not helping Patrick was greater than her surprise. She blamed him not only for the dog's death, but also for nearly causing Patrick's demise. Feeling guilty and unable to defend himself, Jack decided to make amends. The girl had long wanted to replace the wilted flowers she used to honor her mother. Determined to find new flowers as an apology gift, Jack ventured outside, something he rarely did. He eventually came across a villa, long buried in snow. Inside, the home's owner remained in their final pose of suicide, their body preserved as an ice sculpture by the extreme cold. Jack found a bouquet of artificial flowers that would never wilt, perfect for the girl's memorial. When Jack returned with the flowers, the girl was overjoyed. She used half of them to honor her mother and saved the other half for the dog. However, as she was placing the flowers, she failed to notice a zombie approaching from behind. By the time she saw it, it was too late. Fortunately, Jack spotted the danger. He ran out of the house, shouting to divert the zombie's attention away from the girl. Jack threw punches at the zombie, but they had little effect, and he ended up injuring his own hand. It was Patrick who finally ended the threat by shooting the zombie with his hunting rifle. When Jack woke up, he found his wounds bandaged, and the girl was safe. Patrick, meanwhile, had tied up the zombie and was venting his frustration on it. He was surprised to discover that these zombies had developed a rapid healing ability, with wounds healing in just a few hours. Their tough skin could withstand the cold, showing they had adapted to extreme survival conditions in just 9 years. However, the incident had eased the tension between Patrick and Jack. The girl even invited Patrick over for dinner, and he made an effort to clean up. The girl was surprised to see Patrick without his beard, not realizing he was her biological father. During dinner, the three of them were happy, and it felt like life had returned to normal, as it was before the disaster. The next day, they went out together to search for supplies. As they were leaving the mall, they encountered a surviving woman. Living alone for so long in such an environment had made her very wary of strangers. Patrick and Jack had to forcibly bring her back. With careful care and attention, the woman gradually relaxed her guard. It turned out that Emma had not been alone previously. She had been living with a group of survivors. However, their refuge was recently attacked by the evolved zombies, and she was the only one who managed to escape. Just as she finished recounting her story, she heard the familiar, chilling growl of a zombie. She became visibly tense, not realizing it was the one Patrick had captured. Upon learning this, she was incredulous and, without hesitation, grabbed a handgun and dashed out of the room to deal with the zombie. Emma knew from experience that such growls were calls for reinforcements. As expected, it wasn't long before they heard more growls in the distance. The group quickly retreated back into the house, locking the doors and reinforcing the windows, bracing for an imminent attack. Soon, the zombies arrived, their presence palpable just outside the walls. Everyone was on edge, their breaths shallow to avoid making any noise. For the girl's safety, Jack decided to hide her in the basement. However, Not long after she entered the basement, she heard an unusual noise. Turning around, she saw a zombie had already made its way inside. Despite the terrifying situation, the girl remained remarkably calm. She knew that the zombies couldn't see and relied solely on sound to locate their prey. Thinking quickly, she tossed a lamp into a nearby metal box. The noise drew the zombie's attention, and it immediately lunged into the box. The girl seized the opportunity to shut the lid, trapping the zombie inside. Meanwhile, a large horde of zombies launched a full-scale attack on their position. Despite their efforts to reinforce the doors and windows, the undead were relentless, breaking through the barricades. As the situation grew dire, Emma spotted an old projector in the corner of the room. She had an idea. If the zombies were highly sensitive to sound, then blasting loud rock music might disorient them. Emma quickly turned on the projector and cranked up the volume. The blaring music had the desired effect. The zombies, overwhelmed by the noise, began to clutch their heads and scream in agony. Seizing the moment, Patrick and Jack took down the zombies that had breached the house. They then positioned themselves by the windows, using their weapons to fight off the remaining horde outside. But just as it seemed they were gaining the upper hand, the power started to wane. The music faded as the generator began to sputter, low on fuel. Within seconds, the house was plunged into darkness and silence. Since the generator was outside, it was impossible to refuel it without being overrun by zombies. They had no choice but to hold their ground. Patrick knew that staying put would only lead to their demise. Seeing the panic in his daughter's eyes, he made a decision to draw the zombies away, giving the three of them a chance to escape. Even until the very last moment, Patrick didn't reveal to his daughter that he was her biological father. Instead, he encouraged her to stay strong and survive with Jack. With those words, Patrick grabbed a flare and rushed outside. He shouted loudly and began shooting at the zombies, successfully drawing their attention. The zombies, as expected, began to swarm towards Patrick. Taking advantage of the distraction, the others quickly got into the car. As Patrick continued to lead the horde away, he was eventually overwhelmed by the sheer number of zombies. But he held his ground until he was sure they were safe. When he saw that the three were out of danger, he threw the flare toward a spilled oil barrel. The resulting explosion engulfed the zombies, wiping them out completely. The three of them drove away from the small town, embarking on a new journey of survival.